Hi guys, welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome everyone. Welcome guys. I'm gonna give everyone one more minute to join us and then we're gonna start. And we'll go through all our supplies and everything else that we're gonna need for today. All right, awesome. So welcome guys, welcome everyone. If I haven't met before, my name is Vera. I will be your instructor for today and we're gonna paint this super fun, very Christmassy, season perfect painting. So before we start, let's go through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we're going to need. First thing that you're going to need is, of course, is a canvas. I'm going to be using fairly small canvas. This is 8 by 10 inch, but you're more than welcome to use bigger if you prefer that. The next thing we're going to use is paint. I have just 3 colors today, blue, black, and white. If you want to use additional colors, it's totally fine. If you want to modify the shades, here everything is just mostly blue. But if you wanted to modify the shades, let's say you wanted to incorporate maybe a little bit of purple in the background or a little bit of teal, that's totally fine. In that case, you can grab additional yellow and red just to make your other colors or pre-mixed colors, whatever you prefer. But again, bare minimum is blue, black, and white. For this painting, it actually doesn't matter what shade of blue you have as long as it's dark. You're only looking for dark blue, the rest doesn't matter. Whatever shade you prefer. It mostly is a preference. If you go with something like me, I have phthalo blue, so it's going to be a bit more on the colder side in the end. If you go with ultramarine, it's going to be a little more on the warmer side, but it doesn't affect your painting at all. As long as your base blue is dark, that's what you're looking for. Sure, you can use, absolutely, you can use the paper, whatever works for you. Whatever you have, honestly, whatever supplies you have, as long as your paper is not the printer paper and either mixed media paper or paper made for acrylic, it's perfect. So yeah, that's pretty much it for brushes. Honestly, it is totally up to you. I have lots of brushes here, but of course, I'm not going to be using all of those. So for brushes, you can either go with a set of rounded brushes, for example, something like this, or you can go with a set of square brushes. So something like this. Either is fine. It's going to give you very similar results. So it's more of what is your personal preference, whether you prefer square or you prefer rounded. Generally, rounded I find is a little bit easier to work with. If you have both, awesome. You can just see which one works better for you and go with that one. And regardless of what shape you decide to go with, you're going to need one large brush. You're going to need one medium brush. And you're going to need a one small brush. Now, regardless of the size and shape of the other 2 brushes, this one, it's important that it's really small brush. So ideally, number 0, number 1, number 2, so something really small. But even if you don't have it by number or if you don't have any small numbers, as long as it has a pointy tip, it's perfectly fine. It's a good brush for you to use. So this is what we're looking for. We're just looking for something with a pointy tip mostly. All right. I think I'm going to go with the square brushes today. But again, it doesn't matter at all. It is a personal preference. All right. And of course, we're going to need water and we're going to need a paper towel. Or maybe I'll use my large brush rounded and I will do my medium brush square. Let's do that. Again, it doesn't really matter. Plus, let's grab a paper towel. Teresa, that's a great advice. I'll definitely look into the settings of my camera and see what can be done there. All right. Yeah, definitely try canvas paper. That sounds great. All right, so I have my paper towel. Awesome. So what we're going to start with here is a background. We always do. We're going to start, well, actually, before we do any of that, if you have a pencil, we're going to use a pencil just to do one line. So we're going to do this line, the horizon line, just to know where our sky ends and our bottom part begins. But if you don't have pencil, that's okay. You can do this not with pencil. You can do this with a small brush and some light paint, so light blue of any shade. This is just like for us to mark it out. We're not going to be doing anything else with it. And then we're going to move to our background. And we're going to do our background, I would say fairly dark. It's going to be dark all around. So we're actually going to start by just doing it flat blue all around. And then we're going to start adding shades to it. So the middle is going to have slightly lighter shades. So we're going to lighten it up. So our tree looks like it's glowing in the end. And the edge here is going to be slightly darker. So we're going to mix some blue with black and we're going to go around the edge. Once that background is done, we're going to start adding our trees. So it really is up to you which tree you want to start with. But I think I personally want to start with the darker trees just to give our background a little bit longer to dry up before we move to our lighter trees. Because lighter trees are hard to do on a wet background just because they just mix, they don't look that bright. Dark trees are not a problem to do on a dark background. Once all our trees are done, then we're going to add this front part, and then we'll finish up with a fence and stars all around. All right, so grab your pencils, and we're just going to start by putting that line that separates our sky from our bottom. It really is up to you where you position that line. So I would say for me, somewhere around here, and it's just going to be slightly curved towards the middle. So just very slightly curved line. All right, now that curve is done. Moving to our background, I'm going to put my pencil aside and I'm going to grab my large brush. I'll grab a minimal amount of water in it, so I'll dip it in the water, but then I'll dab it off on a paper towel so it doesn't have too much water because I want my background fairly dry here. And I'm just going to take my blue. So I'm not going to be using it straight like this, and the only reason why I wouldn't be using it straight like this because I use student grade acrylic paint, which student grade acrylic paint tends to be semi-transparent and quite streaky. So for me to solve that problem, I need to add a tiny, tiny, tiny smidge of white to it. Again, don't add enough white for it to get light blue. That's not the goal. It still should remain dark blue. But once you add at least a little bit of white to it, A, it becomes less transparent. So it's a bit more, it's going to give you a bit more solid coverage. And B, it becomes less streaky. So again, you're going to have a more solid coverage with less streakiness. It's just better result overall. So do you see that's my straight up blue and this one with a tiny smidge of white? Not much difference in color. Yes, this one is this little smidge lighter, but it's not a major difference. So I'm just going to take this color and I'm going to color the entire thing. Now it's up to you in which pattern you want to color it in because it's just a first layer. So you can color it however you want. Horizontally, straight, vertically, diagonally. Doesn't matter at all because again, this is just our underlay. I would say just don't use too much water and try not to do this layer too thick because we're going to start layering other colors very, very shortly. And ideally, this needs to be somewhat dry before we do that. It doesn't have to be fully dry, but you don't want a thick layer of wet paint either because it's just not going to blend well with the following colors. It's okay for it to be wet. You just don't want a thick layer of wet paint. All right, so do you see I covered my top? So another thing I want to mention right away, if you guys want to do your edges, now is a good time to do it. After the step, you can just go ahead and do your edges, but also it's not super important, so you can skip that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dab off my brush on a paper towel, get rid of that paint, and now I'm going to start rubbing it all in because now I want to get rid of that streakiness. Sorry, guys, my camera. Got refocused. It will be back. All right. So I want to get rid of that streakiness. So I like going over it again. That was just a pretty much dry brush. I don't have any paint, but I just want to get rid of that streakiness. Again, you're not going to see that in the end because we have a lot of other colors to add, and it will get rid of all of this. But also, I don't want to take any chances, so I would rather kind of round it up. So I'm just going in more like a circular motion and rubbing it in to create more of a different pattern, I guess. A little messier, a little more abstract to get rid of that streakiness of just coloring it in. Plus my paint is already started drying up, so this makes it a lot easier to get rid of streakiness. All right, so do you see now it doesn't look so streaky? It looks more like a foggy, snowy, windy, which I would rather have that than just streaks. So next, I'm gonna wash my brush. I'll dab it off on a paper towel. And next color that I'm gonna move on to is gonna be my middle. It's just so slightly lighter. Like it's even hard to tell because this one is a printout, so a printer doesn't even differentiate it as much, but the middle is just very slightly lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a color that's just a little bit lighter. But also see for yourself, depending on how wet your paint underneath is. If your paint dries really fast, or if let's say you're not in a rush and you're doing this at some point later, and you want to let your paint give your paint some time to dry up fully, then you're going to be using just slightly lighter color. If your paint is super wet and you're doing it on wet, you're going to make it a lot lighter than what you want to see in the end. And the reason why is you're accounting for the blending. If your paint is dry, you're not accounting for it blending, so you're making exactly the color that you want. If your paint is wet, you need to make color a lot lighter than what you want to see in the end because it will blend with the color underneath and will eventually get darker. So with this on wet, you're going to get exact right result. With this on dry, you're going to get exact right result. So because mine is still wet, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. And I'm going to start with a rounded brush strokes, blending this in the middle part. First, I'm going to start with the very middle, and then I'm going to sort of spread it a little bit towards the sides. And you see, as it blends in, it creates much, much darker color than what I actually started with. Take a bit more of this. And remember, this middle, the very middle is actually going to be covered by the tree. But what we're doing here is we want to give that tree a bit of a glow. So we're creating that tree glow. So make sure you make it wide enough for it to show, because your tree is going to be pretty wide in the middle too. So you don't want to make a little line in the middle because it's all going to be covered by the tree. You want to make a lot more of the glow. So in the end, you can see it. So I always start in the middle and then I bring it towards the edges. I find that it works a lot better this way, and it's a little more foolproof, I guess, because you're not going to mess it up that way. If you, let's say, go with blue right where you need to, there's a possibility that you go, let's say, a little too far, and then you can blend it properly. and it just gets tricky. So do you see how far I'm going with my glow? Pretty far. And I'm just little by little adding more and more of this light color in the middle, blending it towards the edges. And also, ideally, what creates the best result for this is something you do with a soft brush. So soft brush or brush that's in a bad shape. That will give you the best results here and will be the easiest to work with. Again, the shape of brush doesn't really matter, but if you're familiar with makeup, because I know not everyone wears makeup, not everyone is interested, but if makeup, the concept of applying makeup is familiar to you, this would be almost like a blending brush, or even you know, those large brushes, the highlights brush and all those brushes. You can even do that with those similar to that brushes. Honestly, any makeup brush, to be honest with you, will be good for this too. I probably wouldn't use makeup brush for it specifically because those are expensive and it will likely get ruined with paint. But just to give you an example of the consistency of brush that would be ideal for this. You see now my glow is really nice and large here, and it's not too light either. It's actually barely darker than the rest of it. But this is great. I'm loving this. I think I need to stop with the glow. This looks like a really nice glow to me. So I'm going to wash off my brush. I'll dab it off on my paper towel. And now I'm going to move to my second color. So my second color is going to be a slightly darker one. So again, I'm going to recreate this color again, the one that I started with as a base. Do you remember it was dark blue? It was just addition of a tiniest little smidge of white. So it was non-semi-transparent, but more solid color. Do you remember it was just a touch dark, lighter than the original blue? So this was my background blue, right? The one that I started with. And now to this color, I'm gonna add black. Some black, I would say, it's up to you how much you want of it. It can stay visibly blue with just darkness to it, or it can almost look black. Either is fine because we're overlapping it and we're just using a little bit. So again, depending on where you land and how dry your background is, for me, at this point, this is dry. So I need to use a lot less paint this time, or I need to go lighter. So instead of going full black, I need to go bluey black. Or I just need to rub it in quite light so it doesn't look full on black. Now, if your background is still super wet, it doesn't matter. You can go a little bit darker. You can go with full on black if you want to, because again, you're counting for that blending. So I'll make mine a little bit lighter. So you see I added some blue, some white, just to keep in mind that my paint is pretty dry at this point. And I'll only take a little bit. So I'll dab off my brush on a paper towel to take off that extra paint. And then I'm going to start rubbing it in from the edge towards the middle. And again, do a little bit of this, and then if needed, adjust your color. So for me, I'm quite happy with this color. I think this looks nice. It looks just the right shade darkness to me personally. But if it doesn't look right to you, adjust yours. And again, it's up to you whether you want it to be a super smooth blending in between all of this, or if you want a little bit more textured. Originally, this painting was created by an awesome artist who is our good friend, who is awesome. We absolutely love his work. His name is Dean Shearman. And this painting was created by him originally, and he gave us permission to teach it to you guys. So my version is going to have, of course, my handprint all over it, because I'm a different person. So I personally prefer slightly more texture to my art than Dean. Dean is a very smooth blender. He creates his blending very smooth. He takes his time on blending. He doesn't rush it. He doesn't really take his time, and he can do a beautiful work with a light touch. He loves the light touch technique. It's basically dry brushing technique where you just use very little bit of paint and blend it in, but he can also do it on wet just as well. Again, very light touch, smooth blending, beautiful work. I prefer, as a personal preference, a little bit more texture. I like seeing some texture on my backgrounds. I'm not a big fan of smooth blending for everything that I hang in a house. So either is an option. Neither one is wrong. If you have more of a brain that you prefer looking at smooth blending, it just makes you more content and happy. Awesome. Do a smooth blending. Just takes a little bit longer and a little bit more of rubbing in. If not, texture is totally fine. Don't feel bad about it. I personally love texture. I think it looks great. All right, so I'll give you guys a second for this. And also, we're going to move to our trees after this. So we're going to move to our black trees, which we have some bigger black trees, and we have some really small black trees. Ideally, this needs to dry up just a little bit. It doesn't have to be fully dry or even like close to fully dry, but just generally it is easier to paint when you don't have, let's say, a thick layer of paint that's still wet. So as long as this is semi-dry, it would be better. If you have even a blow dryer in a house, you may want to use it and just give it a slight little blow drying, just to help it dry up a little bit. If, let's say, you're maybe in a cold environment where paint dries pretty slow, or you generally have a bit more slow drying paint than me, because my paint is not a slow drying paint. It's very quick drying paint that I use. And I know we all using different brands of paint, so your paint very well may be a slower drying paint, in which case feel free to use a blow dryer if needed to, and if you have an access to that as well. Yeah, Vicky, no, I agree. Smooth blending is generally more difficult, but it's not just more difficult, it's also more time consuming. And I find that you need to have a certain personality type to get, and I know it sounds funny because it's not about personality, it's about technique, but I think you need to have a certain personality type for smooth blending, because if you are not not the very patient personality type, you'll find it extremely annoying to continue working and just little by little, like with a tiny smidge of paint, doing this or rubbing it with a light touch with on wet. So anyway, it's a lot more for people who are either perfectionists, or have a lot of patience. If you're not perfectionist or don't have a lot of patience or both, you will prefer the texture for both the look of it and but probably also how it feels to do it. No, patience is not my virtue as an artist either. Sometimes you look at artists who like spend hours upon hours, and I mean by hours upon hours, I don't mean like 3 to 5 hours. I mean 20 hours. I mean 30 hours on a painting, and they just go into the zone and they paint and they work on every single little stroke, they perfect it, they get joy from this. This is a joyful work to them. If I had to work on a painting for 30 hours, I would lose my mind, likely. Unless it's just a really large painting, in which case, understandable. But if it's a small painting, I would totally lose my mind. I think I would probably not want to do it. So again, it does take a certain personality type to do that. Alrighty, guys. So we're going to move to our trees here. And I'm going to start with positioning my larger trees. So I have 4 larger trees here. I have 2 on this side and 2 on this side. They are not large overall. They're just a little bit larger than the rest because I'm referring to the ones that are barely visible there as the small ones because they're just little tree trunks with branches. They don't have the fluffiness. So those are different types of trees, right? So these trees, we're gonna do them in our black first, and then they're gonna start drying up, and then as they dry up, we're gonna start making this super tiny ones. And for super tiny ones, you're gonna need a really good brush because they're so tiny. And this is the case where you're gonna actually find it a lot easier to work on a larger scale for this painting. So if you do this on, let's say what I'm doing 8 by 10, you will need a really good brush to do that. If, let's say you're doing this on 16 by 20, you could probably get away with a worse brush just because that area overall proportionally is going to be larger. So if your lines are not as thin or fine, it will still look good because again, proportionally, it's still going to be better looking versus if you make those trees super chunky on a very small scale. So we're going to position those trees. I'm going to use 2 brushes for this. I'm going to use my medium and my small. I'm going to start with my small, and that would determine the positioning of my tree and the height. So I'm going to put 1 middle line for every single tree. And it's not specific that it has to be positioned this exact way. You can position them however you want. And you can make them, like you can change them around. It doesn't have to be this one the biggest, then this one, then this one, then this one the smallest. It doesn't matter. What matters here is that they all are different heights. So you don't want to have a copy-paste tree. And also, try not to mirror one side to another. You don't want to have these 2 exact trees here and then mirrored reflection here, because in nature it just rarely works that way, that it's mirrored, and we're trying to go for more realistic feel here. So don't try to mirror that, and leave enough space for your middle tree. So I would say you should leave at least 1/3 of your canvas width for the middle tree, but also keep in mind there is a bit of gap between middle tree and those trees. There's a bigger gap between middle tree and those trees on this side, and there's a smaller gap between middle tree and those trees on the left side. So even at 1/3, don't position them right at 1/3, right? Don't position at 1/3, 1/3. Still, even then, move them a little bit closer towards the sides. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to water down my black just a little bit to make fine lines. And I'll use my small brush here. All right, now I'm going to start with my tallest tree. It's not that tall overall either. I would say it is a bit less than 1/3 of this space. So if 1/3 of the space would be this, I mean, it's about 1/3, could be slightly less than 1/3 of the height of this from here to here. So again, this is just to give you an approximate measurement. You could make it, of course, larger. You can make it smaller. It's entirely up to you. So I'll position it somewhere right here. I'll put my 1 line. I'll make it slightly on an angle. All right, that looks good to me as far as size and slightly on an angle. Now I'm going to position my second tree, which is going to be a bit on the left of that. It's going to be shorter too. All right, that's my first 2 trees. Now I'm going to position 2 trees on the other side. Again, I'm going to move them a little bit more towards the sides, and they're not going to be as tall. All right, done. I have my trees positioned, and now I am going to grab my middle brush, and I'm going to turn them into trees with my middle brush, my medium brush. So how are we going to do it? The goal is to have them to have all our trees triangular shape with a really pointy tip. So you want to, if you cannot get your trees with your medium brush fully, you can even start with a small brush and do the top with a small brush because you want it nice and pointy. And as you go lower, you can start, you can move on to medium brush. But generally what you do, you dab. Start with the really small dabs at the upper part of the tree, at the very top of the tree. And then as you go lower, the dab should be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You see, because I'm using square brush, I'm dabbing with the top edge of my brush, so I'm using this part, right? The top edge to dab with. I'm not using the full width of a brush. I'm not using it like this, right? I'm just using the top. Let's clean up my hand quickly. And another goal is the fairly solid middle. But do you see how the edge is not solid? It's certain dab rows go further, certain dab rows don't go as far. So it has that little air in that edge. That's my one tree. I'm going to do my second tree. I'll do two on the other side. All right, so those are my black trees, and now I'm going to let them dry up because I can't do anything with them until they dry. And I'm going to move to my small brush. And so there are a couple trees here on my background. So there are two trees on my left. There's one in between and the one on the left side. And on my right, there are also two trees, one here and one there. Again, you can make them any size, just try to have a variety and try to use as small of a brush as you can. And also what's very important, water down your black paint. If your paint is too thick, you can have the best brush in the world, you're not gonna be able to do fine lines. So don't water it down to consistency of like a dirty water or transparent consistency. It should stay, still remain very solid black. But what you don't want is you don't want it clumpy and chunky and blobby. You want it nice and liquid so you can fill your brush full and use just the very tip of your brush. And so it doesn't make it bulky, so your brush stays small. Right, I'm going to start with a tree on my left. I'm going to place a little tree trunk. I always start with the bottom and bring it up, because wherever I start is usually the thicker point. And then I'll add a couple little tree branches from there. They're really, really fine, all of that. Do you see? Super, super fine. I can show you closer. This is approximately what it looks like. And you can even skip those branches if you don't have, and those trees, if you don't have a small enough brush and you feel like, oh, I'm just gonna, ruin it if I do it, just skip them. They're not crazy important. They don't affect your painting as much, or you can even wait until your canvas and your paint dries fully, and you can do this with like a gel pen or a fine tip Sharpie if you just really want to add them, but you don't have a brush that gives you the ability to do that. Technically, it's a bit of cheating, but also you gotta do what you gotta do if you don't have the right brush. All right, so I did the one there. Now I'm gonna move on to the other side, and I'll add 2 more on the other side. I'll do one right here. See, I started with a tree trunk, and then I added large branches, and then when that was done, I continued adding smaller branches. And position last one of those onto this very edge here. All right, so I have all my black trees. You don't need to do any more. If you want to, you absolutely can. Nothing wrong with having a few more if you feel like it. Totally fine. But for me personally, there's no need for me to do any more. I'm quite content with the amount that I have right now. And the next thing that I want to move on to while I'm letting those trees dry is actually going to be my main tree. So my main tree is going to be done out of a brush strokes, done with my medium brush. You can do with a small brush too. It really depends what your medium or small brush look like. If your medium brush is more of the, oh, sorry guys, 1 second, that's I apologize for the crying child if you can hear that. That's just my husband trying to put my toddler to bed. This can go many different ways. If you ever had a toddler, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right. So it depends what brush is the right width for you. I could probably do this with my medium brush. I couldn't do this with a small one. It's too small. Do you see? It's too thin. It's not going to give me the right results. But I could use this one. If I use this one for the small one, which is still sort of small brush, right? It's not as small as the one I just used for the trees, but it's sort of on the smaller side, but I could definitely do this with this one too. So see for yourself what brush is the best brush out of what you have for this step, but generally something medium to small is probably best. And if you still have a pencil, you can actually start by just putting a pencil line right in the middle to know where the middle of your tree is. And also you can do it either straight or slightly tilted. When Dean was making, this one is actually slightly tilted. Do you see? It's not straight. The top is not, it's more of that. The top is a little bit tilted this way. It's not straight. You could do it straight. Straight is easier, but also it is a preference. Like, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to have it slightly tilted towards the left here, or do you prefer to have it straight? Either is fine. The majority of the tree is not too, wiggly woggly. It's just the tip that has a little that bend, because the rest is so wide, right? You can't really determine whether it's straight or not. So if you do, thanks, Vicky. If you do have a pencil, feel free to just indicate, I would generally say right in the middle of your canvas and indicate the height too. So basically at a line will be the middle line of your tree. I would go as high as this, but remember this top part is literally just like one line. So you're not going to bring your tree that high up. Really, you're going to bring your tree until maybe here. So maybe until here from me, right? I'm not going as high up because I'm leaving the star and all the other pretty things. But again, it's up to you how tall you want your tree to be. It can be definitely taller or shorter. I mean, it is whatever works for you guys. And from there, you're going to start adding flicks. So you're going to start with small flicks. And then they're going to get larger as you go down. You're not going to use too much paint on your brush. You can always do second or third layer with a little bit more paint. But for the first layer, go with just a little bit. Because you're almost like marking it up, and you don't want to do it blobs because you can't fix it. Something goes wrong, you're stuck with those. So just take maybe a little bit of paint for now. And the same general idea, it needs to be fine on top. So the flicks should be very small. So you might, again, find it easier to do it with a small brush to start with, unless you're comfortable with a medium. For my top ones, because I'm using square brush, I'm going to use just the edge. So you see, to make a finer lines. Because if I use the full width, they're fairly thick, right? So just if I use just the edge, I can get fine lines. But again, you can do this by doing two different brushes. You can start with small brush, and then as you go down, you can progress to a wider brush. So you see, I'm just starting, again, not using too much paint. I'm not using like a massive blobs of paint, because I'm just mapping it out in a way, and then I'll go over it with more paint. You see, I always flick it from the middle out, pushing a little harder where I start. And then I lift my brush as I go further to create that nice little pointy end. All right, so do you see I mapped it out. I do like the shape, the size, so I'm happy to move to actually using now a solid white paint. And in a certain areas, I'm gonna add more of like a solid white paint to just have it more solid and pop more. And again, use whichever brush is comfortable for you. I'm sticking with the exact same brush because I love this brush. I think it's working well. Also, do you see all the little lines have a slight curve towards the upper part, just a slight curve. All right, I'm quite happy with this. I think I'm gonna leave it. This looks good to me. I'm gonna leave that alone. And now I can either work on my upper star or I can move and work on to the little trees on the sides here. I think I may, I don't know, it's hard choice what to do, where to go next. But either is fine. Let's go on to the star. We may as well, right? We may as well finish up this tree. You know, I may even add a third layer of white here once this dries up a little bit, just to make it a little more solid. But if it's solid enough for you, you don't have to add any more layers. This is just because my paint, again, it's a bit more semi-transparent. Even white is not like a super solid white. It could be more solid. So I'm having to add layers and layers. So for the upper part, I'm going to start by taking just a tiny touch of my white, just a touch of white on my brush and literally rubbing it in. And then I'm going to go where the top is going to be, somewhere around here, and I'm going to add a circle. So dry brushing the circle on. And then you can make the middle a little bit more solid. And then from there, I'm going to use my small brush. So again, the smallest brush that you have. I'll water down my white just a little bit, just a touch. Again, I'm not trying to do it transparent. I just want it to be nice and liquid so I can make fine lines. And then I'm going to add a dot right in the middle here. And then from the dot, I'm going to add a vertical line up. So with it being a little bit thicker where it starts, you push a little bit harder and then you slowly let it go as you go up. So the edge is nice and fine. And the same thing going down. And then the same thing to the left. And the same thing to the right. And then in between those, I'm going to add very fine lines too. And those ones are not going to be going as far. They're not going to be as long. And then I'm going to dry my brush up slightly so it still has some paint, but just a little bit. And in between, I'll add a few more, but those are very small. Do you see they're very short and they're dry brushed. So they're not as visible. They're barely visible, the other ones. All right, and that's my star. Thanks, Vicky. She is pretty cute, that little girl. All right, and then we're going to move to our small trees. So again, using the same small brush and water down white paint, not super watered down, not super liquid, not too watery. not transparent, just liquid enough to make fine lines. We can add our little trees. I'm going to have, do you see there are 2 trees right here? But again, they're so small. So try to make them as fine as you possibly can. So 2 here, and I'm going to do 1 here for sure. There is 1 really small one behind there. Honestly, I wouldn't even bother with this on the scale painting. If I was making the much bigger version, probably. But on the scale, it's too small to even bother with. Oh, things on my table here are falling down. It's okay, it happens sometimes. All right, so I'm going to start with this 2 here. The 1 is going to be really tiny. Somewhere here. And 1 almost behind this tree. Right, so do you see I added 2 small ones there? I had another small one here. All right, and again, if you want to add more, go for it. There's nothing wrong with adding a few more light trees wherever you feel like they should go. Totally fine, go for it. But for me, I would not be adding any more in white, but I will be adding some highlights on these trees now. And I'm going to do those highlights in 2 colors. I'm going to start with doing them in blue, and then I'm going to do them in white. So I don't want to do them in white right away. And I'm going to start with my medium brush again, just the same brush that you did the actual trees with. But then you can do I mean, if you prefer, you can even do them with a small brush, but I prefer starting with the same brush I started with. And then for the white ones, I may do with a small brush or I may do with the same brush. So I'm going to start by making mine blue. We're aiming for like something similar to this, I would say. And again, it doesn't have to be that specifically, just some medium light blue, I guess. You don't want it too light because you don't want it to be like a baby blue, but you don't want it too dark either because you still want it to read on your tree. So let's try something like this and see how that goes. Let's see. Definitely need to be darker than a background there, so maybe even lighter than that then. Yeah, so like aim for this color, I would say. Whatever color you had there, approximately. And in the same manner, you're going to highlight them. So you're mostly just like separating the rows, if that makes sense. Remember how we had a rows of dabs? So you're pretty much separating them with this color. That's 1 tree. Oh, nice. People from Brazil. That's fun. That's awesome. How's the weather in Brazil? Just curious. It's pretty cold in Canada. Not freezing, but not warm either. And then I'm going to do them on the side too, and I'm going to try to keep this left side a little bit darker here. So you see that they don't look that blobby black anymore. They look a lot more integrated into the image and just nicer in general. And then I'm going to take some white, and again, you can do the same brush, or you can switch to a smaller brush if you find that this one is a little tricky to work with. Just a little bit of white. You don't need like a huge blob of white. Just a tiny touch. And I'm going to start adding it to the section that's closer to the middle. So on the left, it's going to be my right side. And on this side, it's going to be my left side. All right, so my trees are highlighted and done, but now that my middle is a little bit drier, I'm going to add my last layer of white just to make it a little bit more bright in a certain area. So you don't have to do you don't have to go all over the entire thing. You can just choose a couple branches, but I definitely have a few areas that I would like more solid white, so I'm going to go over them. All right, looking great. Quite happy with that. I'm going to move on to, actually, let's add a second layer here too, just a little smidge so it looks glowier there. And then I'm going to move on to my bottom part, and I'll clean it all up with some paint here by creating my bottom part. So the bottom part is going to be, the bottom of the bottom part is going to be about the same color. The top is going to be lighter. So you can start by making, I would say, about the same color as the lightest part here. So again, approximately, could be darker, could be lighter. It's not precise math. And use your largest brush for that. I'm going to take some of my white. Sorry, some blue, some white. Mix them up. I'd say this is approximately that color. Again, can be darker, can be lighter. It's not specifically, not very specific. And then I'm going to start coloring that in. I'll color in the portion here. And then I'll dab off my brush on a paper towel with paint on it, not washing. Just dabbing, 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 dabbing. And then on the same brush, while it still has some paint on it, just like bare minimum, I'll take some straight white with this color. I'm going to go right on top here. I'll add that straight white, but because my brush is not fully clean, it's actually going to turn right into the color that I need. I mean, if you're a more precise person, you can just pre-mix it. Wash your brush and pre-mix it, but for me, this is good enough. And then I'm going to blend it down. There we go, we have light blue on top. And getting darker as it goes down. If you want even darker on the bottom, you can add a tiny smidge of a darker color. Just don't overdo it. It doesn't need to be super dark there. Looking pretty good, right? I think it does. It's looking pretty good. Wash off my large brush. Dab it off on paper towel. Go to the side. And the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to move on to my fans. And you're just going to grab whichever brush you think is the most appropriate for this job. I'd say small brush is probably the safest choice. And we're going to grab straight black paint and we're going to start adding our fans. I have a few, I'm going to always start with vertical pulls because vertical pulls are straight, right? They're not broken up. Horizontal ones, it's not one straight, it's chunks, right, that connect the verticals. So we're going to start with verticals. Have 3 on this side, 3 on that side. They should be positioned around the same level, like you don't want them some too far down, some too high up. If there is a slight difference between the height, that's totally fine. That's actually a good thing, but you don't want a major difference. You don't want some of them like going really, really high up and some of them really, really low. And I'm going to start first once more around here, but position them wherever you want to. It doesn't matter. So 1, 2, 3. I'm happy with this. It's fine. The other side. And again, it depends. If you're a very calculated person and you like precision, you can even wait until all of this dries or blow dried and pre-sketch all of this. Because once you go with paint, if something goes wrong, you can't fix it. You're pretty much stuck with it. So if you prefer, you can just wait until your paint is dry and sketch it, or blow dry it and sketch it. You can do that too. It's an option. And now I'm going to start connecting them horizontal lines. So 3 lines for each. I'm going to start, let's say, with this one, for example. 1. You see how both lines stick out a little bit on each side. 2, 3. And then for the second one, it's going to go either higher or lower, but not on the same spots. So you can do this one lower or higher. I'm going to go higher. Let's say, for example, 1, 2, 3. Next one again, either higher or lower. Go lower. 1, 2, 3, and so on. So I have done my 3 on this side. Now I'll do 3 on this side. 1, 2, 3. Let's go lower for the next one. 1, 2, 3. And then higher for the last one. All right, and our fans is done. And now I'm going to need to let it dry because I can't add highlights until it is dry. So I have to wait. But as that's drying, there are a few other areas that I can work on. And one of the areas is I can add the shadow for it. So you're just going to go with a blue that's a little bit darker than your darkest one here. So this is, for example, the blue that I was using, right? So I'm just going to take my darkest blue, mix it in, and there we go. I have a blue that's a little bit darker, and that's perfect. And with this, we're going to add a shadow that goes on towards the side. So here it goes this way. And here it goes the opposite way. And you can add a few of those lines too. There's no need to be precise with them. This is more just like, as long as they're somewhat there, Even a hint of those lines is great. That doesn't require a crazy precision there. But if you prefer precision, nothing wrong with that. You can do that too. So there's on my shadow. Again, I'm still going to give those a bit more time to dry because they're very wet. And as they're drying, I can move on to my stars. Stars are super fun. There are many ways you can do it. You can splatter, and it's going to be very not controlled, but just abstract, beautiful, free flow. Wherever it goes, it goes. Originally, when Dean made it, this does not look like a splatter to me. I think it's more of a controlled positioning of stars. So we're going to follow the same. We're going to follow his lead, and we're going to do a controlled positioning of the stars. But if you prefer splatter or a combination of the two, it's going to look awesome. I promise you. It's actually going to look a lot more snowy if you do a splatter. It's going to look more blizzard, I guess, versus just a couple snowflakes flying around. And if you prefer the look of actual snowflakes, you can even add a few snowflakes after. But always start with just position a few dots. If you want to add additional things, such as snowflakes, always do them last. So there are two ways to do it. Because originally, as you can see, the dots are really, really small. I'm going to do them with just the tip of my small brush, because nothing else will give me the same size. Nothing else is going to give me just as small of a dot. I'm just going to position them anywhere I want. Just a nice little range of dots everywhere, small dots for my snow and stars. Now, if you're working on a larger scale, or if you don't mind having a larger dots, what you could do is you could grab any brush that has a rounded tip, and you can dip the tip of your brush in white paint. And what that will do, and then dot it up. Yes, they're going to be slightly larger than this. They're not going to be as small, but they're going to be perfectly round. And every following dot is actually going to be the different size. So you're going to get a nice variety too. Because while your paint is still super fresh and you dot, you're going to get the biggest dot. But as you continue dotting, and as your brush runs out of paint, every following dot is going to be smaller and smaller and smaller. So you're going to end up with a really nice variety of the size of dots. And again, they're going to be all perfectly round if you do it with that technique. I'm not doing it only because I'm trying to stay true to the original, and in the original painting, they're much smaller. Because if I do it right now on my scale, on my small canvas with the brush that I have, they're going to be probably much larger than what you can see here, which is still going to be a really good look. But I don't want to deviate too far from the original, so I'm going to show you same way that Dean made it. All right, this looks awesome to me. Again, if in addition to that you want to add splatter, go for it. How you do a splatter, a couple different ways to do it. One way is you grab your large brush, you grab really watered down white, so you really water it down, rub it, make sure it's all the way in the bristles of your brush. You don't want it just to have a blob on top, you want it all the way. And then you can either just literally do this with your finger, and that will give you the tiniest little splatter, or you can use second brush and hold it about an inch from your canvas, and then do this with a brush with paint on it over just a clean dry brush, similar to that, and you will have splatter that way too. So those are two ways to do splatter. And now I'm going to move on to my fence, and I'm just going to take my white paint and a small brush, and I'm going to add a snow. So I'm going, it doesn't matter whether you start with verticals, horizontals, doesn't matter at all. Right, so the left side is done. I'm going to do my right side. So there you see horizontals, I'm adding snow fully. And for verticals, I'm breaking it up a little bit. See, for verticals, it's broken up into those chunks. Thanks, Vicky. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, and after that, my officially is done. The only thing that I think I want to add is because I was doing highlight here with my medium brush, I couldn't get the little tips of the trees. So I'm just going to take a tiny smidge of white on my small brush this time. I'm just going to add. Do you see how his has a little bit of a pointy tip, those trees? I'm just going to add that. Do you see? Nice little tip. Because I was doing my highlights with a medium brush, and you just can't get that with a medium brush. Maybe a nice little touch with a small brush. Ta-da! It is officially done. Yay! And big thank you to Dean for letting us use this painting to teach it. All right, guys. Doesn't it look pretty awesome? I think it does. Again, you can add a couple of visible stars or a couple of snowflakes, whatever you want. If you want to add a couple of bunnies here, or like put in names on a snow, put a little snowman somewhere in the distance there, admiring all of that beauty. Whatever you want to do with it, go for it. It's your painting, so make it unique to you. If you didn't do your edge, you can do your edges now. But pretty much you're just going to add whatever color is here. Actually, let me show you. Whatever color is there onto the edge. So for example, here, some variety, some version of dark bluey black color. You don't have to do it like a perfect match, but as long as it's from the same color scheme, I guess it's fine. You see, it looks a lot better. It gets rid of that unfinished edge. And for the bottom, again, whatever color scheme you were using, just extend that. And of course, ideally, you want to extend your fans too. But if you don't, that's okay. This still looks better than this, to me personally. But again, it's personal preference. So whatever works for you guys. I'm going to do both sides at this point because I already started. I may as well, right? May as well finish. Ta-da! Yeah, I don't like messy edges. I'm not a fan. And guys, if this is your first time and you just accidentally stumbled on our YouTube channel, I'm glad you stayed until the end. Thanks for sticking around. And this video is going to remain right here. If you couldn't do it today, you can come back and do it anytime. It is not going anywhere. We're not deleting it. It can stay right here. So just save the link somewhere in your notes, and then you can come back. And of course, feel free to check out all the other videos that we have. on our channel. We have lots of them, and we're adding 1 to 2 weekly here on YouTube. So feel free to stay tuned for that. And we do have a schedule of all upcoming live events as well. So if you want to check those out, there's a button that says notify me. So if something is interesting, you can push the button notify me, and then whenever we go live, it will notify you. And again, we never delete them. So you can come back and work at it at your own convenience, always. Yeah, and guys, feel free to share your results. I will make sure there is a link in the description of this video to where you can share them. It's a Facebook group. We always encourage everyone to post their results in the Facebook group because we want to see how they turned out. And it just always makes us feel generally like we're doing it together versus, I mean, almost like in one room versus in different parts of the world. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. And yes, if you guys want to leave a tip, please do that. There's also a link in the description of this video. It's a PayPal link. You can use that as well. And to those of you who tipped already, even through YouTube here, just like Vicky, thanks, Vicky, or through our website, pre-tipped, thank you so much, guys. It helps us a lot. It helps us make art just like this for you. You know, pay the bills and continue doing what we love, which is art. So yes, thanks for joining me, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to always write them down in chat or in comments here. We do not check comments very often, so we will answer them when we see them. May take a while. If there are pressing questions that you would like us to answer for you, you can always email us or message us on Facebook, because we do check those messages more often than we check the comments once the event has passed. So you will get a faster response that way. All right, well, thank you all for joining me, guys. Yay, glad you liked it. Enjoy the rest of your night, everyone. And we'll hang out next time. Bye, guys.